I think I'm ready. Hello, YouTube. Away we go. Well, almost away we go. From the studio on the north side of Cary. No, I'm in the wrong place. The wrong place on my script, and I knew better than this. Even a script didn't help. From the studio, in the bonus room, above the garage, on the north side of Cary, at the foot of Mount Belzoni, this is the Triangle Talk Show. It is episode 36 for November 14th, 2018. Price. Landslide. Yay? I'm Gary Pierce. I'm this guy. Riding out the music here. Boom, boom. The music is going to take forever. We'll get on with the show, okay? All right. North Carolina 4th District Congressman David Price won in a landslide. Again. That's a good thing, right? I'm going to say no. What? Heresy. For us liberals. Okay. Hear me out. Hear me out in a minute. I'm going to do the show solo here on Wednesday afternoon because there's a lot more to do than I can squeeze into an hour on Sunday with the new kids on the pod. And this one's political. The new kids, they're not highly political. Well, I suspect that Katie is. I think I can pull the politics out of Katie. Dexter is carving out a defiantly middle ground, a place that, I think I occupy, but when I start looking at the details, not so much. Bobby vows he doesn't care. We'll see, Bobby. Okay, and it's Wednesday afternoon. I'm retired. Kids are in school. I'm sorry. Kids. They're at work. They're not kids. Stop calling them kids. They're adults and they're at work. But I can do this whenever I want. And so I'm going to do a cast on some things that have struck me recently that are all political, all politics. And I guess I don't want to drag them through it, kicking and screaming. Maybe they'll listen. Maybe they'll want to talk about it. Maybe not. I'm going to start with a great gerrymandering example from last week's election. Okay? David Price, here in the 4th Congressional District, won in a landslide. Do I have that? Yes. I have the picture I was looking for. He won in a landslide. There's his line here, 72% for David Price, 24% for somebody named Lure. Never heard of him before. Never will again. That's a huge landslide for David Price. That's bigger than usual. He's usually won in landslides, typically in the 60% range. This time in the 70s. So, yay. Did it make you want to cheer? Did it make you feel really good? Let's hear it for our side. Well, yeah. But that's what gerrymandering is all about. Democrats in North Carolina won 3 of the state's 13 House seats, U.S. House seats. They won 3 of the 13, despite getting almost half of the total statewide vote cast for congressional candidates. Again, every 2 years for the past decade. So Republicans got just 50% of the statewide votes, 50.3% to be exact. But they got 77% of the congressional seats. All right, half the vote, 3/4 of the seats. Doesn't seem fair, does it? How did this happen? Well, we don't vote for Congress statewide. We vote by districts. A district is a geographic area. Hang on, I got to maneuver my map here. There we go. A district is a geographic area that is defined by lines on a map. And for those of you looking at the video, I'm showing a map of the districts in North Carolina. There are 13 of them. Each one has a congressional representative. Here in the Triangle Talk Show Zone, the 4th District has got Western Wake and the city of Raleigh, Cary, Morrisville, a little bit of Durham County, not the city, and then just about all of Orange County. The city of Durham and most of Durham County are actually in the 1st Congressional District. Okay, so there's 13 of those districts. Each gets a representative. Who draws those lines? How do we get those districts? Well, it's the party that's in control of the state legislature every 10 years after the census. There's a census on every 10 odd years. So 2000, 2010. It's about to be another census in 2 years in 2020. And whoever is in control of the state legislature after that census, so the next year, 2021, they get to draw the lines. How do they draw them? Well, that's where gerrymandering comes in. In the election that we just had, especially in the 2 districts that make up most of the triangle, so that would be District 4, this one here I'm showing on the video, and District 2, this one that surrounds Raleigh to the east. These are 2 really good examples of how the maps are drawn and why they are drawn the way they are. Okay, so over here we got District 4. David Price, 72% of the vote. Yeah, woohoo, right? Okay. Yay, David Price, 72%. Over here, District 2, which is not Raleigh, but eastern Wake County and the counties around it. That was against a contest between George Holding and is it Linda Coleman? Pretty close race. Holding 51%, Coleman 46%. Oh, Coleman got so close. It was in a red district. And Holding was an incumbent, all kinds of advantages. So close. Well, hey, what if the lines were drawn just a little different? What if some of these 4th District voters, these voters that tend to go Democrat, Raleigh, Cary, Orange County, not Durham, what if some of those lines, some of those voters were shifted over into the 2nd District? The 2nd District, again, is more suburban, more rural than the rest of the triangle. It's Wake County, but not Raleigh. And again, some of the surrounding counties, most of them. And of course, you don't move the voters. You move the lines. You don't pick people up from their houses and make them move from one part of the area to the other. You move the lines. You redraw the lines between them. The line, say, that's currently drawn on the east side of Raleigh. Let me zoom in here. So we got this line on the east side of Raleigh. It kind of carves through Knightdale, Garner, and puts that area in the 4th District. And then around it, Wake Forest, Clayton, Fuquay, Varina, Holly Springs, they're in the 2nd District. So what if you were to draw that line a little bit so that it carved a little deeper into Raleigh, to the east side of Raleigh, where a lot of Democratic voters are? What if you did that? Well, Price still wins. He's lost some of the voters from the east side of Raleigh. They're Democrats. He's lost them. They've moved into the 2nd District. So He still wins, but, maybe by 65% instead of 72%. That's still yay, right? He wins. He's typically won by about 65%. And then Coleman wins by 51 or 52%. Yay again, if you're a Democrat. Okay, so that's oversimplified by a lot. There's a domino effect for every adjustment that you make in one district lines. Every district has to have about the same number of people in it. So if you add people by adjusting the line in one place, you've got to subtract people by moving the line someplace else, and then that affects that district and the next district next door. It's a fiddly game, and you have to keep working at it. But it gives you an idea how gerrymandering works. What I was describing was literally gerrymandering, figuring out who the people are in one place and how they might vote, and putting them into a precinct or into a district, just depending on how you want that district to go. So precinct by precinct, you know how voters have voted in the past. You can predict how that precinct might vote in the future. No guarantees here. It's a game of odds. You draw lines so that a lot of Democrats are packed into the same district. And then those Democrats, well, they win that district big time, like David Price did in the 4th. And then all the surrounding districts can be drawn to have Republican majorities. The Democrats win their 1. The Republicans win their 2 or 3 or 4 around it. That's gerrymandering. This only works because Democratic voters tend to live in urban areas, and Republican voters tend to live in suburban and rural areas. So drawing the lines that pack Democratic voters into a few districts isn't that hard. But to maximize the effect, to get 70% of the districts with only 52% of the vote, well, 50% of the vote, you got to get creative. And Republican line drawing has been very creative. Well, okay, so Democratic line drawing was creative too when they were in charge a long time ago. After the 2010 election and the census, the Republicans were in control of the legislature for the first time in a while, and they used some new computer technology to gerrymander way better than the Democrats were ever able to do it. And you can see how this works by looking at this chart. It shows the vote totals and the percentages in all 13 of the North Carolina districts. In three of the districts that the Democrats won, the elections are all blowouts. All of them won with more than 70% of the vote. In the 10 districts that the Republicans won, the elections were a lot closer. Most of them in the mid to upper 50s, and in the 40s vote totals for the Democrats. So they were closer. They were still solid Republican wins for most of them, but they weren't that blowout of the 70s, even the 60s. 50% to 40%, somewhere in there. So what if the lines were drawn so that the number of Republicans and the number of Democrats in each district were as even as possible? So again, statewide, Republicans won just barely over 50% of the votes. Democrats won about 48% of the votes statewide. The remaining 2% went to third-party candidates, libertarians mostly. Well, the results would have been more like 7 Republican congressional seats and 6 Democratic seats, instead of what we got now, 10 and 3. Okay? Have you been following? Taking notes? There's going to be a quiz. There are many more things to consider than what I've reviewed. The details get detailed. I want to mention just one more thing, though. Again, there's lots more that I could talk about, but I'm going to mention one more thing. Minority majority districts. Sounds like a contradiction in terms. If you're a member of a minority group, it would be nice to have some representation in Congress. But how do you ever get that if you are, by definition, in the minority? And those people in the majority win their seat. And of course, this is presuming that race is a big factor in how people vote, and I think I'm safe in saying that it is, even for us liberals. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 makes gerrymandering legal for the purpose of creating majority-minority districts. So it's okay to draw district lines to include enough of a minority population that they have a good chance of electing one of their own, I'll say, to office. The North Carolina 1st and the North Carolina 12th districts are examples of those kind of districts, and indeed they have elected African Americans to represent them. And we go back and look at the map. There are 2 of the 3 districts that have gone Democrat. So there's the 1st and the 12th is here where it says Charlotte. It's too small to even have a number. There we go. I can see the number. Okay, so those are the 2 districts that have elected African-American representatives. Whoa, what happened to my map? The 4th district is not majority-minority, but it is majority Democrat. So those are the 3 that have elected Democrats. Okay, so I think you can see. What am I saying here? Oh, I guess you can see why the city of Durham is in the 4th district and not in the 1st district and not the 4th. It helps make this 1st district, which starts with Durham County over on the left and then swings to the state line through Henderson and then a big piece of northeastern North Carolina, but not all the way to the coast. So makes that a majority-minority district, but I think they needed the Durham population to be able to make that happen. Okay, so minority-majority, electing minority candidates is a noble goal as long as we're far from colorblind in who we elect, and we are. But it complicates the idea of nonpartisan redistricting. A lot of Democrats, a lot of progressives think the idea of nonpartisan redistricting is a great idea. So if we did that, if we had done that, we would get that nearly 50-50 representation in North Carolina. But it could be at the cost of having any African-American representatives. Could be. Again, if we're voting, if we're not colorblind in our voting, and we still aren't. So it complicates the idea, this idea that you can gerrymander to have minority-majority districts gets complicated if you're going for nonpartisan redistricting. Now, this is a complex subject, and I don't have either the time or, frankly, the expertise to explore it fully in this podcast, but I wanted to at least mention it. And if you want to know more about gerrymandering, that what I recommend is that, and I'll repeat this, I've recommended it before, go to visit the 538.com's gerrymandering project. I'll put a link in the Triangle Talk Show website. It's at the website and a series of podcasts. And they talk about gerrymandering extensively. Let's see what this sounds like.
Gerrymandering is when redistricting goes wrong.
Okay.
And redistricting is the process of drawing political maps. This happens every 10 years after we conduct the census. So we count everybody who lives in the United States. And with those new numbers of knowing how many people are in each place, we draw districts. Okay,
so they probably do a way better job of explaining it than I did. So stop by there and play it. And then they've got I think, half a dozen? No, more than half a dozen. They got a bunch of podcasts that will go into it area by area and topic by topic. Okay, it is 6 podcasts, so half a dozen. And they explain it pretty well. And if I had been taking better notes, I'd be a better lecturer on the subject. So stop by there. Okay, that's all I'm going to talk about right now on as far as the gerrymandering stuff. But I guess the big point was Price won with a 70% majority of the vote. Makes you feel good. Yay for our side. Wow, boy, did we really pull that one off. Except not so much. If we had carved out a lot of those Democrats out of the 4th District, scattered them to a couple others, or maybe just pushed them into the 2nd, and Linda Coleman could have won with a few more Democrats in her district. Stay tuned. We'll talk about that some more later on. I want to talk about some podcasts that I'm listening to as well. I'm currently listening to a podcast called Bagman. It's from Rachel Maddow. That's Mad-O, not Mad-Ow. Shadow, not Mad Cow. Maddow. Almost nobody who interviews her or has her on their shows or introduces her pronounces her name correctly. But I think I've got it. Maddow. Like shadow. Okay? So Bagman is her new podcast. It's a limited series. It's a series on how Spiro Agnew, former Vice President Spiro Agnew, came to resign from the office of VP. It was in the middle of Watergate, actually toward the end of Watergate, just before Nixon resigned. Agnew had been accused of taking kickbacks when he was governor in Maryland and some lower offices, and he kept taking them as vice president. They say people would come with envelopes full of cash to his office in the White House to deliver his bribes and kickbacks. That happened, or is alleged to have happened, which is bad. But the cover-up, as usual, the cover-up was worse. Agnew tried to get a U.S. attorney investigation halted. Let me show the picture of the podcast here on the website, and again, I'll put a link to it on the Triangle Talk Show website. So Agnew tried to get a U.S. attorney's investigation into these kickbacks and corruption halted. He tried pressuring the attorney's older brother, who at that time was the Maryland senator. He tried to get that senator to pressure his younger brother to quit. And this went all the way up to Nixon, who was in on the plan. It is in the Nixon tapes. You don't hear about it much. Mostly you hear about the smoking gun stuff from Nixon that got him to resign from his office. But the Agnew stuff is also there. One of the go-betweens trying to get this pressure put on the senators, one of the guys who was recruited to do that was then Republican National Committee Chairman George H.W. Bush. So he's involved. And that's where the podcast is now. They're in the middle of the series. That's what they've gotten to at this point. So I recommend, if you're interested in this sort of thing, go check it out. Rachel Maddow does a little different kind of thing in the podcast. It's one of those podcasts that's, NPR-like. The host is speaking calmly and deliberately, and they toss in music. Wait. Every once in a while they toss in music. And that separates important elements of the podcast so you can tell when things are happening. I could do that. So Maddow does a little different style when she's doing the podcast. I think the next one I'm going to talk about is actually a little bit better, more intriguing, because NBC, MSNBC and NBC, they got a lot of resources to put into a podcast. They can really amp up the style. And they didn't over amp the style, but you can tell it's even more highly produced than some of the other podcasts that you listen to in its genre. Okay, so the other one that I've been listening to is a podcast called Slow Burn. It is produced by Slate. The first season, which was last year, was on Watergate. And I don't recall them mentioning the Agnew scandal in the middle of Watergate. Maybe they did. I took a quick look at the subject of each of the episodes, and I didn't see Agnew's name mentioned. The second season was on the Bill Clinton impeachment, and that was produced right in the middle of the Kavanaugh and Me Too things. So the podcast, in looking at Bill Clinton, and of course his impeachment was based on Monica Lewinsky and other sex scandals, leaves a bad impression about how some of these women's accusations were just dismissed. And it also gives a good impression of how Bill was really just, kind of a horn dog.
How much do you know about the scandal that got Bill Clinton impeached?
Monica Lewinsky is under the microscope, Bill Clinton is under siege, and the White House is trying to contain the damage.
Maybe you know the basics. That Clinton's presidency came to a screeching halt amid a storm of accusations involving sex, power, and partisan warfare. But if you're like most people, you only have a grasp on the vague outlines of what happened.
Yeah, and I am like most people with only that vague outline. So again, I'll put the link to the Slow Burn podcasts on the Triangle Talk Show website. So why are these podcasts showing up now? Well, who doesn't like a good history lesson when it's full of scandal? But the point, of course, is Trump. These episodes are from fairly recent history, like compared to George Washington or Lincoln or even Roosevelt. So recent that I was alive during all of them. Okay, I'm old. I'm 69, but I was alive during all of them, even if I wasn't paying that much attention. And these episodes, they reveal all of the corruption, all of the shady deals, and the smoking guns of the scandals that they are covering. You can see exactly what happened, how the players at the time tried to cover it up, and how it was being viewed in the media and by the public. I mean, as these things were going on, there was no rock-solid proof. As the events were playing out, you didn't have the smoking guns yet, not until the end of the scandals and the end of each series. So as they're presenting them, more like linear in time, if you don't have a good grasp of, memory of what happened, you haven't studied them, you're going, oh, wow, how did they get from A to B to C? And it's cool to look at how it looked to the public and to the media at the time. Now, the partisans, they took sides, especially the bad guys. Their supporters rallied. They stuck with them to the end and sometimes beyond. And the phrase witch hunt comes up a lot in both of them. And then they were over. And we saw what happened and we saw why. So what about Trump? Well, we're still in the middle of Trump. Trump's behavior is more, it's totally public. One accusation of obstruction is based on something he said to NBC News anchor Lester Holt right on network TV. That part of the reason he fired FBI Director James Comey was because the FBI was looking into possible conspiracy between Russia and the Trump campaign. And so Trump fired him. And that's what led to the appointment of special counsel Robert Mueller. And by the way, it's pronounced Mueller and not Mueller. And even though it's spelled kind of Mueller-like, you might think that, but he pronounces it Mueller. And the only people that call him Mueller are the right-wing guys who want to deliberately mispronounce his name. Okay, so we know Trump did that. He fired Comey, and we know why, or at least we know why he said he did it. What we don't know is what Mueller's ongoing investigation has turned up on Trump. We know he's gotten some convictions. He's gotten some guilty pleas. He's gotten some cooperation from several key members of the Trump campaign, of the administration, and Trump's business before he was president. But we don't know what, or even if, he'll try to pin anything on Trump himself. Or how. Can he indict a sitting president? Conventional wisdom says no. Could he turn stuff over to the House for impeachment, especially since Democrats just won a House majority? But remember, they won't take power until January. And there's a lame duck session that, still will run in between in December. Well, conventional wisdom on that, on whether he will turn things over to the Democrats for impeachment, that conventional wisdom says maybe. And some Democrats are champing at the bit to do this. By the way, this impeachment thing, it's not well understood. So let me do a little tutorial on how it works. Impeachment is step one in a two-step process. The House of Representatives holds a hearing, and then they vote on whether or not to impeach a president or some other federal officer. The vote is a simple majority, 51%. If they vote to impeach, then the issue goes to the Senate for another hearing, and that is step two. So being impeached doesn't mean you're out. It just means that the House thinks you should be out. And the Senate holds their hearing. And they vote on whether or not to convict. And that takes a 2/3 vote. So, for example, Bill Clinton was impeached by the House in 1998. The charges were perjury and obstruction of justice. And right now, recently, Trump has said he can't be charged with obstruction of justice because he's the president. Well, that's exactly what the House charged Clinton with. So the House impeached Clinton, but the Senate acquitted him. At the time, the Democrats in the Senate had a 45-seat minority. It was 100 senators. They only had 45 seats. All of them voted to acquit. Republicans had a 55-seat majority, not a 2/3 majority. That would have been 67 senators. It's a high bar to clear. But even so, 5 Republican senators voted to acquit on the perjury charge, and 10 Republicans voted to acquit on the obstruction of justice charge. So Clinton was impeached, but he was not convicted. And, of course, he continued to serve the rest of his second term as president. One other president in history was impeached. That was Andrew Johnson back in 1868. He was also not convicted. About 15 federal judges have been impeached, including one Supreme Court justice. Some of them were convicted by the Senate. Some were acquitted. Some just resigned in the middle of it. That Supreme Court Justice Samuel Chase was acquitted in 1805. So that doesn't happen very often. Okay, so Trump. Remember I was talking about impeaching Trump? The Democrats in the House, well, they're going to have enough votes to impeach Trump when they take power in January, if they stick together. I mean, they're going to have a surplus. There'll be a more than 51% Democrats in the House. They've done a pretty good job in this election. They'll have a surplus so that a few Democrats can defect from that vote if they have to. So yeah, the House could impeach, but they're not even close in the Senate. I mean, they're going to be a minority by a seat or two. Some election results are still going into recounts, so we don't know exactly what it's going to be. But they're going to be way short of the 2/3 majority they would need to convict. So they'd need a bunch of Republicans to join them. And based on everything Trump has done that we know about so far, well, that's not happening. Maybe if Mueller has some pretty big bombshell charges and evidence, well, maybe. And that's really what we're all waiting for. So these podcasts, remember I was talking about podcasts? Slow Burn from Slate, Bagman from Maddow and MSNBC. And there may be some podcasts that in this genre that I haven't heard of, and I'll bet there'll be more before we're done. You know, with politics, we're never going to be done. These podcasts, they're here to remind us that despite all the denials, despite all the supporters rallying to the cause, despite all the cries of witch hunt, we've had some remarkably similar political scandals where we've seen exactly what happened. We've seen how they started. We've seen what went on. We've seen what finished. We know what was covered up. We know how. We know by who. So in these podcasts, they seem awfully similar. So, of course, the Trump story isn't over yet. Even though one side says, nothing to see here, go home, disperse. The other side has already convicted him in their court of public opinion. That's what the podcasts are there to remind you, that this story isn't over yet, but here's how it could go. Here's how it went in the past. Compared to Watergate or even Clinton, the Trump story is moving really fast. There's something new every day. Often that new thing is just a shiny new thing. It's a distraction. Trump is either very expert at throwing crap out there, usually as a tweet that pulls the news cycle away from the bad but more complicated and nuanced news. So maybe he's really good at doing that. Maybe he's an expert. Or maybe he just throws so much crap out there that the news is always running in circles after it. And he's just getting lucky. But it's not that good a strategy. It doesn't matter. That's what's happening. And yet, the real progress is still in slow motion. The real significant developments play out over weeks or months. The high-level personnel changes happen over weeks. The effects of those changes take weeks. The effects of those changes, they take weeks or months to become clear. And Mueller's investigation is in its second year, and we still don't know what the big payoff will be, or if there will even be a big payoff. Okay, so the podcasts, they keep us engaged, hopeful, expectant, on the edge of our seats? Or do they just remind us that it happened before, within many of our lifetimes? Okay, my lifetime. There's a pretty good chance that it's going to happen again. And that's it. I'll see you on Sunday at 3 with the new kids on the pod for our live show. If our schedule holds up. This is new. We'll see how it works. Of course, you can listen or watch anytime to the Triangle Talk Show on YouTube or your favorite podcast app. And someplace we got a Facebook and Twitter presence, I guess. Well, I know we do. So go follow us or whatever people do on Facebook and Twitter. I don't know. This has been the Triangle Talk Show, episode 36. It's been politics, November 14th, 2018. Price, David Price, Landslide. Yay? Yay? Yeah, I don't know. I'm Gary Pierce, your podcast snowflake. Over and out. I'll be out as soon as I can turn things off.